of Symposium. My name is Kermit Harrison, in case you have not met me before, and if you haven't, I would ask you to please stop by and shake my hand before we leave. Not right this second, but before we leave and all that kind of thing. So, we're here to talk about love. What's the day again?
Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day. All right. Now, I'll be honest with you. There was a time in my history or what have you where I would have worn a shirt that says, well, I'll clean it up a bit, forget Valentine's Day. Right? There's a time in my development where that might have been true. Okay, but you know, getting past that and growing to kind of understand the larger scheme of things, so to speak, and also more personal development on my part, I now see this as a really good opportunity to help develop a new love culture that everybody's looking to see and everybody wants. But the difficulty ends up being that our old culture quite often impedes our progress. And it's quite true that in many cultural situations, the knowledge of a people often outruns the cultural expression of that knowledge. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Got it? So, in other words, you don't act, you know better than you act. How about that? Is that an easier way to do it? Okay, so part of what helps get you in the right regiment for doing something is having a routine, a connection, a community of folks who support that. All right, so what I want to talk about here today, first of all, is the development of love as human development. And the more that you come to understand that, the more that you develop your humanity. So that's point number one. Point number two, you see on the board, is going to be talking about how it is that we currently arrange some of our relationships and interactions such that it undermines our ability to fully express that love with other people and that kind of thing. So that's thing number two. And then thing number three is what kind of steps can we take, what kind of things can we do to help facilitate and bring on that culture. And then at the end, I'm going to entertain questions. So if you got something that comes to your mind, don't forget it. In fact, you know, write it down if you've got a little piece of paper or something of the sort, so that we can get those questions out. All right, so first things first. What does this mean when I say love development as self-development? What's that all about? Well, first I have to talk a little bit about some of my background assumptions. Number one, have people heard folks say that all interactions are energy interactions? Have you heard that before?
Yes.
Yes? Yes. We have heard that interactions are energy interactions. Okay. You've also heard people talk in terms of vibes, like I vibe well with a certain person, or it was a good vibe at this place, or something of that sort. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, so at this point I want to now have you incorporate those two to kind of be extensions of the same thing. So energy, we can imagine, produces vibrations. And vibrations can be felt, and the nature of that energy kind of communicated through the vibration. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so in other words, in fact, just last night I was drying clothes, and as I was laying down, I heard something on my dresser go because the vibration was being produced out on the, on the back porch by the wash machine. All right, so you can kind of understand these things. All right, now that we kind of think about energy, vibrations, I'm going to make another extension to a word that you hear a lot, spirit. Now what I mean by this is, well, it's going to be difficult to articulate, but it's going to be an extremely expansive, unable to be defined easily. That's why it's going to take a long talk. But I want you to separate it from your notions of spirit that involve like a glowing ball of light inside somebody or something like that. Because what I want you to start thinking about is the reverse of the way you normally think about it. I'll start with, well, two examples that you're pretty familiar with. Starting with exercise. How many of you have ever exercised before? Oh, good. All right, that's good. Now, let's imagine that, let's suppose that I was interested in being stronger and I wanted to lift a lot more weight. Let's imagine that. Let's make it specific. Let's suppose I want to be able to curl a lot of weight. Imagine that. Okay, now if I were to do a lot of curls for an extended period of time over, a significant amount of weeks or whatever, might that change the look of my arm?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so my arm then, it might be more room actually if you go around that way and get to the little point. Because if it stacks up by the door, I think we'll have a fire hazard. Okay, what was I just saying? Right there. All right, so through the activity or through the action, then my arm ends up being developed, but it doesn't go the other way. Meaning, you don't try to, by some means, make your bicep bigger in hopes of then being stronger and able to lift weights. Instead, by the lifting and the doing, you increase your ability to do that, and then your body compensates for that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, well good. Because part of what happens when we start talking spirit, energy, vibrations, and things like that, you start thinking that you are this thing called your body, and that the energy and all emits from this focal point, right? But I want you to think in the reverse. I want you to think that your spirit, or the thing that's actually you, extends infinitely. And that what this ends up being is the particular focal point through which that infinity expresses. Now it's different, okay? And so then the more you express that through this particular focal point, the more this focal point changes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so it's kind of a different view than you're normally used to thinking, because you're used to thinking, well, if I act some way, then I will change some intangible thing. But I want you to think in terms of, by the time it happens in action, it's already gone down in the intangible. Okay, and so that's where it is that we're trying to fix it, so to speak. Now, so if it's the case then that you become more aware of being able to increase your, let's say, your vibration, your positive energy level, your, what's our other word?
Spirit.
What's our other word?
Love.
Love, thank you. Love. All right, let's work these out all together again, because I want you to be hearing them kind of together. All right, so we said love, we said what else? Vibrations, we said what else?
Spirit.
Spirit. Okay. So what's the benefit? What's the benefit of being able to develop this at a higher level and all that? All right, being in your individual perspective. Sometimes it's difficult to think about other people feel different than you feel. Some people feel very close to how you feel, but some people feel, and I don't mean about things, I mean literally, what is it like to be you? When you walk outside, somebody cuts you off in traffic, what happens inside of you?
I get mad.
If I go into a situation, somebody's talking over me or something like that, what does that produce in somebody? Like how do you end up feeling? When a lot of people are around, how do you feel? If a bunch of people were to run in the room all of a sudden, what does that do to you? How do you feel? If you're about to do something that you think is very important or whatever, how do you feel? All right, so can you imagine that going through the everydays and all that kind of stuff, everyday going and comings, that your emotive would rise and fall, or at least that does for a lot of people. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. When it falls, how does that feel? Bad, not so good, right? When it falls. So one idea then is that to keep your levels high and consistent directly affects how you feel and how you feel through all different circumstances, right? And the more tuned you are, and the more higher vibration, we're going to call it now, or the more perceptive you are of your spiritual being and that kind of thing, then the more difficult it is to bring you out of that vibration. Much more difficult it is to lower your vibration and make you feel bad or put you into a bad situation. Now, if I endeavor to hang around other folks who are also increasing their levels, then it's easy. But the thing is, that's not the way we kind of live yet, right? I said that we're working on a culture. So quite often, what ends up happening, I think the analogy that came to me most recently, it's like if you are washing your car and there's a constant mud storm going on, right? So you can wash inside your garage for it being clean, but as soon as you drive it out, what happens? Right, so while we're working on the mud storm outside, we really just have to work on our own cleanliness and hoping that it happens more and more people do it. Okay, so part of the benefit then of being much more centered in yourself and developed in yourself is you end up being able to feel a whole lot better, being much more relaxed, and then you're able to observe things, see things, perceive things that you ordinarily would not at lower levels, let's say. There's an example that I've been getting a lot of mileage out of lately here that I'm going to use a lot. So even if you've never been in a fight before, I want you to imagine it for a second. I want you to imagine being in an all-out, melee where you're just windmilling, swinging, full steam. Imagine that, okay? And imagine it's going to last for like 3 minutes. Now, the average real street fight lasts less than 10 seconds. Okay, that's what's true. But at any rate, let's imagine. Let's imagine you're going to war for 3 minutes solid. Now, it's all bad. You're like in the middle of an abandoned parking lot somewhere. Nobody's going to break it up. It's a terrible scene. Okay, now let's say 30 minutes into the melee, while the exchange is getting all hot and heated or whatever, somebody just comes up behind you and casually paper cuts you. Keeps going. But you're in it. You're all in it. Now, how much over that 3-minute period is that paper cut going to bother you? Not much at all, right? You might not even know it happened. Okay? Pause on that for a second. So imagine now a paper cut that you didn't feel at all, that you didn't attend to. Now let's imagine that instead of a 3-minute melee, that you're sitting calmly, quietly, enjoying your morning coffee, let's say. Perhaps sitting on your porch, whatever the case might be, and then somebody comes and paper cuts you. Now how are those next 3 minutes going to go? Okay, let's make it even worse. Let's suppose they, get it real good in between your fingers and All right, now I'm glad it got the reaction it did, because what I'm wanting you to pay attention to is the intensity of that particular experience. Right? A paper cut could be a very intense experience, but it's an intensity that you could completely and totally miss if you're involved in a melee. Right? But it's extremely intense. It's extremely intense, but you could completely and totally miss it because of the range of its intensity. It's narrowly construed, if you will. Okay, so now what I want you to do is take your mind to this paper cut. You're going to do the flip of it. Instead of pain intense, do the pendulum swing in the other direction and imagine elation that's equally as intense as, say, a paper cut would be or what have you. Now, could you imagine that being good?
Yes.
Some of y'all could imagine it. Some of you can't imagine that the exact opposite direction from a paper cut into positive would be good, you don't think? I'm going to get 100% consent on this before we move on. Because it's important that you understand what we're saying. Many people in this duality, kind of an understanding of things, come to think that they understand darkness by seeing the light. You think that you understand joy by ways of having pain. You think you understand fast by way of people being slow. So with that in mind, if you have the intense experience, of a bad paper cut kind of situation, but we are taking it away from the physical and imagining that it's a positive manifestation that's equally as intense. I could imagine some other experiences that some of you have that you would liken to that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, if you are involved, however, in a particular kind of life melee, or the melee of developing, or the melee of the world interaction, whatever, you then miss these things that ordinarily would be extremely elating experiences. So part then of your development in love and in self is being able to perceive things, see things, feel things that you ordinarily would not, because ordinarily you could be involved in the melee. So part of it is getting out of that melee, where you're not in there doing this, and you can kind of calm down and then feel the stuff that's good. Okay, now, so I'm talking, or I have been talking about the individual, but in Valentine's Day, everybody wants to think about couples and pairs and all that, so let's move to that now. So we're going to imagine first the ideal, or a more ideal circumstance, and then we'll talk about how it's not in the being ideal. So a more ideal circumstance are two folks who are on this particular kind of journey that I'm talking about now. One where you're trying to separate yourself from things that would decrease you and decrease your understanding of yourself. And if you are in pursuit of that self-knowledge, which ends up being spiritual knowledge, which ends up being love knowledge, which ends up being knowledge of the divine, if you're in the pursuit of that, then another person who's also in the pursuit of that and is also committed to helping you and you then do that, well, that's the circumstance that we're talking about. Now, if you're not then in the melee and you're in this kind of circumstance, there are experiences that you could have. Now, I'll boil it down to the physical because that's easy to talk about. But understand, like I said, by the time it happens in the physical, it's already gone down otherwise. So, remember I said if you're involved in the melee, there are things that you can't attend to, right? And so many of us in the mainstream would think that a sexual interaction is a physical interaction, when, that's just like I was saying about that lifting weights. It ends up being what you can see, but what's going on behind the scenes, so to speak, is what substantiates it. Now, many of you have very good, very positive sexual experiences and all this, which is good. But many of you have not. Many of you have never had a sexual experience where you walk away thinking, that was great, wonderful, 100%, I'm glad I did it. I have no reservations, no qualms whatsoever. Right. Well, that's the melee. The qualms, the worries, the the insecurities, all that kind of stuff, that's the melee. That's going to, you know, if you're thinking during the action about stuff, oh gosh, I wonder if I smell bad, or I wonder if whatever you might be thinking about, that's your melee. You're involved in this, and then you're missing it, right? Now, at a level where you're calm and elevated, there are folks, many folks actually, who come to understand this. And let's say on the men's perspective, it takes men developmental while before they can separate, for instance, ejaculation and orgasm. I know I didn't tell you I was going to say those words, but here they are. Now, a lot of folks think they're the same thing. They're not the same thing. They often, in the beginning, happen at the same time, so then folks think they're the same thing, when they're not the same thing. And then once you start being able to realize that you can have some control over these things, and then you start recognizing that you can extend that control outside of yourself. So there are couples who follow this model who would be able to bring each other to orgasm without touching one another by sitting close and intending, focusing on that vibration that we're talking about, understanding how does that connection works, feeding into it much more and more and more, not being involved at all in these ideas of the melee and none of that, and then can reach that vibration without touching. And then the touching just ends up being a whole new other part, something that, again, does not get experienced at the level of, I hate to say lower levels, but that's the only way I can describe it right now. At lower vibration levels, that's not yet experienced. In fact, many folks are so involved in the melee that they try to use a physical connection to distract them. And if you're using it as a distraction, then it cannot be all that it could be. Okay, with that being said, let's move now to our second point. How is it that our current idea of obligations, restrictions, all this kind of stuff end up hurting, restricting, or limiting your ability to understand love both within yourself and with other folks? So, love, the way we're describing it right now, is infinite. It's more than we can talk about for sure, because even using words brings it to the finite. So it's an infinite expression. So the very moment you try to make it restricted, obligated, you try to contract it in some very particular way, you're doing something else than loving, doing some other thing. Now in our society, it ends up being like this. Vulgarly stated and quickly stated, from the time we're little, we end up being raised with the notion that a man has to contract a woman into being a consistent, constant sex partner. Like, I don't need to worry about having a sex partner if I get married, because you done signed that piece of paper which said I'm good forever. So that's what a lot of cats do it. Right? And then that's how come you get phrases like, well, why buy the cow if I get the milk for free? Well, you're thinking in terms of an exchange of some sort. And you're thinking that buying is the contractual exchange of a person's body, right? Which is, again, a finite thing, and that's not helping another person express. Okay, so it's on the men's side. But then on the women's side, what ends up happening is you're raised thinking, I get a contract that means you got to do what I say do, and you can't leave me. And I got some papers that say that, right? And when I say commit, what I mean is you do what I say. That's what it means. If you don't do that, then you're not committing properly. You're just afraid, you weak man. All right. Well, I mean, we're laughing, right? But this is the horror. This ends up being the horror of the situation. Because what ends up happening then is the two people are not providing that mirror to your own divine self. What they're really doing is trying to use you as an extension of their desires without knowing that that's what's happening. The other person becomes an extension, a thing, a doohickey, if you would. All right, so let me talk a little bit more about this mirror thing that I'm saying here, about what a person could be and how this obligation thing hurts the mirror. If you were getting dressed and had to put on makeup and had to arrange your hair and do a whole lot of other things, you could do it without a mirror, couldn't you? Yeah, you could. And you might be able to get good at doing it without a mirror. Isn't that not right? Okay. I hope you can see where I'm going with this analogy, so I'll stop and say at the front end here, just like you can work on your own spiritual development by yourself. Just like you can get dressed and you can exercise with no mirrors, no real mirrors. You can exercise without counting the reps and sets you do. That's possible. You can exercise without ever knowing how much weight that you put on the machine and all that kind of stuff. It could happen, and you will get better even in the absence of those other markers. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, but now let's go back to that notion of either getting dressed, putting on makeup, or working out, or whatever. Does it become a lot easier when you have a mirror? Yeah, because you can see it a little bit more precisely and all that kind of thing. Okay, so then, if we start understanding the truth of our development in love, then what we recognize is that the other person then provides a mirror for our spiritual love development, not an extension somehow that I'm going to make into something. Or worse, what ends up happening quite often is a person tries to fix themselves by projecting the problem on the other person and then beating them up. That's what I see the most. Really, what I see the most is you'll get with a person that has the problem that you're trying to work out so that you can beat them down, right? But what that's not doing is not fixing your problem. It's not relieving your pain. It's not relieving your suffering. It's not getting you to be able to see beauty in the simplest, easiest things. I was most recently at a recital, a bunch of little children, and there was this one child that got up and played. Okay, it was mine. And I said, okay. Anyway, but when this was happening, there was this moment where I got all teary. And I started crying a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. Anyway, so folks were looking, like I was being weird. And I was like, no, y'all don't understand the beauty that I'm watching right now. Not following it. Anyway, if the other person is providing for you this mirror that is not to beat you down, not to tear you up, but to show you the best in you, to help you develop the best in you, to help you situate your clothes straight and get your hair right and get everything tightened up, well then that's a good opportunity. But when used some other way, it prevents you from getting there. So understand what I'm saying. When I try to make you be my mirror, then you're not being a mirror. You're being my kicking dummy. You're being the person, you're the person who I get to get mad with as an expression of what my expectations are of somebody else. But they're usually of yourself. Notice this. This is what I mean. A lot of times when somebody is beating somebody else up because they're not doing what they want to do, really it's an expectation that they themselves have difficulties achieving. And so then they're kicking the other person for that. And if I got a contract, well then you're contracted into being my kicking dummy. Right? That's bad. All right, which brings me to this. Now, if I'm saying you shouldn't be contracted, then how am I going to then say it's possible to be cheating? Well, here's how. Because I didn't say be inauthentic. I said that the truth is expressing what you've got going and how you're interacting with others and all of that, so that you give other people you're interacting with the option to interact with you or not if you are interacting in certain ways with other folks. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay, but that's a different thing, right? Honesty and forthcomingness, and also thinking of the other person as if they were yourself, it produces a culture that, would not end up having folks running all over everybody and all. At any rate, but under the current idea of contraction, this is what makes cheating, so to speak, so enticing. Because what ends up happening is that person, if they understand that you have a, quote, significant other, then they're not going to try to obligate you in certain ways. So then when you end up talking and having a relation with them, it's freer. It's an illusion. Because you still have the issue where you're wanting to control the other person, but it's being tied up in your primary relationship. So then what ends up happening is you have this free, open, non-obligated, contractually restricted relationship that you then express yourself, and then you get to be the you that you like being. Right? And then you get confused again. Right? You get confused again, thinking, oh, it's this person. When that's not what has happened. It's that you try to obligate love in a way that it can't be obligated. Is that making sense? Okay, cool. All right, so actually we've already talked about our expectations of the other, which often end up being you projecting. Quite often is what ends up happening. Okay, so let's work it on out here. Toward a new culture, understanding the favorite you. Now, going back, dovetailing, going from our cheating example into our towards a better situation. So the dual problem here is that the other person, the cheatee or what have you, is still being given this narrow, limited window in which to exist. Right? You have to exist here outside of my primary obligated situation. But then quite often what happens, if this thing doesn't work out, your obligated situation, then you turn to that person, and the next thing you try to do with them after you're out is what? obligator, sign this paper, you mine forever, or whatever. Even if that paper just means, and this is why I say toward, even if that paper just means a category that you have a name on that's called a relationship in a certain way. Now, I know this sounds counter, but it's not. Really, what we're doing is counter. So what I'm saying is, quite often when somebody starts to talk about being in a relationship or relating, they're really reducing it to a role relationship, a relationship between two notions, not between two evolving projects, not between two evolving people who are learning and expressing and growing. Quite often what happens, let's suppose that, I'm seen hanging out with somebody, repeatedly, let's say, right? And then somebody comes up and says, oh, okay, so what's up with you and your girl? Well, what are they looking to get out of that question? Right? Think about it. What are they looking to get out of that? I said, well, you saw me. I was standing there. We were talking. It was cool. You saw me smile, and I was happy about it. What are you asking me further? What do you want to know? Right? Well, think about it yourself. What usually comes after that? Well, are y'all, and then you're looking to say something that's going to align you with a categorical understanding of your interactions. Some of y'all got deer in the headlights. Let me say that one again. So what ends up happening is, again, oh, I know what I forgot to say, and then I'll dump all this out. So one of the things that decreases your love is this thing called fear. Fear is the love decreaser. Decrease fear by increasing love. Right. So part of the obligation restriction comes out of the fear that you won't be loved. Everybody following that much?
Yes.
Okay, so if I'm worried about being loved, then I definitely want a commitment down because I'm scared that you're not going to love me. You follow?
Yes.
Okay, so what ends up happening then is even, when I say written down, you're thinking marriage, but even in a dating relationship, if I, just hanging out with somebody for a while and all of a sudden like, well, what is this? Well, that question is, I'm worried because I'm putting a lot of energy into you and you can dip. Right? I'm getting fearful here. Now, and then what'll make it worse, that person's friends and associates, right? Yours too. So your friends and associates, they make it worse by asking even more, difficult questions about the nature of the interaction between you and the other person, and can we easily fit it into a box of, now I know what it is. I told you already, though, that love is what? It's infinite. Right? And so it's not going to be able to be confined or described in that way. You can't do it. It's not going to be able. You can't do it that way. But also the truth is, as you develop more in love, you express it. People know it already. In the Christian tradition, for instance, they say that the true Christian is known by their love. The follower of the way of love. Well, if I have to obligate you, and you have to get something written or some kind of a statement of something or other to understand if I love you or not, then we're not in a loving relationship. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yes.
Right. Also, if I'm in this relationship because I'm trying to feel better by way of correcting you, well then again, that's not me developing who? Myself. Right? It's not me developing myself. Now, it seems contrary, but it is the case. The further love development of yourself puts you in the position to have the positive love connection with somebody else. Because you've decreased your own fear, you've decreased your own worry, and you understand that the source of your energy does not come from the other person. Now, I'm probably going to say that a gajillion times, because what often happens is people cut themselves off from the truth of their source and then try to gain the energy from the other person. And they keep pulling it from that other person. And before long, you'll end up being in a bad situation, and it's rough because that's not what's happening here. That's not love. Love isn't me taking from you, right? It's me adding to. And I can add to you by understanding me deeply. And then I can understand that expression in you, and then I'll know how to treat you and me. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, so part of what has to happen in this with you and your friends, number one is understanding the difference between happiness and amusement. You can be amused. Amusement is cool, and may you all be very amused and not, for instance. But happiness is a more consistent, long abiding. It's much more of a condition that you're in than an episodic kind of a feeling. And so working towards that, again, focusing on, the self-love and developing yourself. Well, when I'm talking to somebody else, I have to start monitoring me and see, is this the favorite me? When I'm talking to this person and I'm interacting, is this the me I really like, or do I feel bad about this me? Is this the me that gives me the most energy? Is this the me that reminds me of my own personal truth? Is this the me that supports the ideas that I have when, in my quiet times about my own development? Is that what's being supported? Or am I hiding that me with this person? Are you following? Right. Am I hiding what I think is the best of me when I'm interacting with that person? Because that's going to tell you right off if that's the one you need to be interacting with or not. Right? And then if I'm friends, if I'm in the surrounding circle or whatever, like you will be and like you are when you're talking to your friends, the question isn't, do you have a name for what it is y'all are doing? Right? That's not it. It's how do you feel in this? And again, not are you amused? Do you feel yourself being developed more towards your own truth? Do you feel that happening? Or is some other thing happening? Because if some other thing is happening, it's not. All right. So this came to my mind quite sharply. I took my little one, I have a 4-year-old, and I took her to a daddy-daughter dance over this past weekend. And there was this moment when I was standing and I was looking at the floor, and at this point, most folks were sitting down, but little girls were all on the floor. So there were like 20 little girls on the floor. And they were all, dancing and making it happen. But the thing that was not matching was the music that was being played. And so I started thinking about this. I started thinking, if we want to develop, people to the best they can be, and you have a bunch of little girls here right now, then what are you playing for them? Are you playing sorry, tired ballads that people are still crying about how relationships are horrible and all that, so that they expect that a relationship should be horrible, so that they go into it wanting to get beat down? Right? Is that how we're supporting the growth? Because that's how our culture gets continued. What is it that we're teaching our children? So if you don't have anything to offer them in that situation, then that helps you to understand it's problematic. So, towards our new culture, you'll be thinking, what kinds of things would I teach, instruct, play for, demonstrate, show my 4, 5, 6-year-olds up to 10, 11, 12-year-olds? What do I want them paying attention to? Do I want them thinking I have to exchange my body? If you listen to the radio now, you would think that love means sex. In fact, people exchange when they're doing a clean version of a song, they put the word love in when they really mean a physical action. Right? And then people start thinking that that's what it means. And people start talking in those terms. But that's a part of the cultural problem that we are looking to correct. Okay. I've said a great deal. So I'm going to pause at this particular moment, do a quick recap of what we've been saying so that it doesn't get lost. And then I want to open it up for questions, because some of you got some things churning. I can see it happening. And so we'll get a few of those out. We've got a good 15 minutes for questions. So the overview. What I said initially is that love, and the development of love, is synonymous with the development of the self. Okay? And the understanding of self. I related that to vibrations and energy, and I said that your ability to feel, express, channel, if you would, at higher rates, this energy, is the development of your humanity. What I mean by that is this. Humans, us, we aren't just the kind of things that can move our bodies. We're also the kinds of things that can, feel outside of ourselves. We can communicate without touching, or without talking, without even being in the same room. We can, feel little nuances and changes of attitude. We can, through our own feeling good, expand that outside of ourselves so that other people in our area can feel equally good and all that kind of thing. There's so many things that we're able to do as humans that we don't celebrate, that we don't talk about, but we're starting to. The new culture is coming along. And so this development is a love development, and it's developing in the self. Now, what's been hurting our ability to do that is our misunderstanding of love and our grasping onto fear, and us trying to establish relationships out of fearful notions that we won't be loved. And so that's a difficulty that we're looking to correct. And then towards our new culture, in our own actions, when we are, monitoring how we're behaving, and also when we're talking to those who are close to us, these are the kinds of thoughts that we should be talking to them with and about. Not, is this person buying stuff for you or whatever, but how are you feeling? How are you developing? What kinds of conversations are you having? Are you expressing your favorite you with that person, or are you hiding you with that person? So these are the kinds of things that you will want to be discussing and developing towards our new culture. All right, questions? Yes, sir.
Define, how do you see, I'm grasping the concept of the mirror. Their significant other should be your mirror.
Yes.
How do you find, or how do you look at the mirror without realizing it's?
I figured. Okay, so two ways to answer this question. Number one, remember my statement about the melee and about how you didn't feel the paper cut. Remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. So the idea is that you see it all the time. You just don't know what you're looking at all the time. And if you are motivated internally by your own fears, then you misinterpret what you're seeing. So part of what has to happen is you develop calm yourself, and that fear thing really is serious. I mean, when you get that squelched, and then you can see another person in much more honesty and much more truth, then you can be more honest with yourself about what you're seeing. And you can see that that person very well could be responding to what you're doing. And most often, that's exactly what's happening. The behavior you're seeing is a response to you, but you're not thinking about your own behavior, only what you're seeing. But when you start, being a little bit more honest about it, or relaxed about it, not so fearful of your own development, then you start recognizing that the things that are happening in the other person, things that they're doing, things that they're saying, they are reflections of you. They're reflections of what that person is anticipating you like, think, want, or don't, depending on where they are in their development. So part of what has to happen, again, when I say mirror, we're going from a physical idea to an abstract idea, right? Physical, I'm looking at a surface and I'm watching myself move. In a person, I'm looking for attitudes, notions, behaviors, certain kinds of responses, things that make me upset. Because if I get upset, I'm telling you, 9 times out of 9, what's happening is you have observed a behavior that you are famous for. And it's that got on your nerves. Because that's your personal alarm saying, hey, that's what you do. Now, you can project or realize that that's what's happening and immediately go inward and say, okay, what am I doing that's like that? Because if I'm this pissed off, it's got to be something in me. And that's kind of the thing. A lot of people do hanging stuff all the time. You don't get mad. When somebody does something, I'm really peeved and something's in me. And sometimes it's not a one-to-one relationship. It's not like I did the exact thing they did. Perhaps I made them feel the way that they're making me feel in this situation or something like that. So it is very nuanced. It does take a bit of time. But you're watching in terms of attitudes, reactions, consistent statements from a lot of different people who you interact with who keep saying the same stuff about you. Thank you for the question. Yes, 1, 2.
What would be some tips you have into increasing your frequency and your love and your energy and your feeling?
All right, so here's the thing. We could probably make, a big, long list that goes all the way down here, right? But I'm just going to we'll do 3, okay? There's an article recently published in Time. It's on the cover right now about meditation. And it talks about how meditation decreases the internal melee that's going on and starts to reveal to you the magnificence that the human entity is. Not just your body, but the human entity. And the more that you can heal yourself and work through your difficulties through just calming your mind and letting your ego be quiet. Part of what ends up happening, part of that fear that undermines your love kind of resides in your ego. And that ego shouts out those fearful things to you. And part of what happens, you ain't crap, you're stupid, you need to, anyway. So what happens in the meditation is it trains you to shut up your ego and make it be quieter and quieter and quieter until because that's part of the internal melee is you fighting your ego. So when that calms down and is quiet, then you start noticing those other things. That's thing number 1. Thing number 2, I would certainly say regiments of some sort are important. There are things you can do to decrease your vibrations. For instance, you can eat things that are extremely unhealthy, and what you end up having to do is notice how you feel. When you eat something, immediately pay attention to how you're feeling right after that. If you feel slower, if you feel something or else, then what you're eating is decreasing your vibration, and you should not eat that, most likely. Same thing about, I know college students, this is a tough deal, but sleep. is an important deal. You're much crankier and easy to get upset when you're sleep deprived and all that. So regimented sleep. So for right now, we'll just talk about what you eat, your sleeping, and your meditation. Those three things. If you just do those, you'll increase pretty quickly. Exercise. Yeah, exercise is quite important. I'm sorry I didn't say that.
Just to
One, two.
clarify.
Sure.
Just to clarify, your mirror can be, it doesn't have to necessarily be the person of the opposite sex. It can be a friend or
Absolutely.
friends of-
Now that we mentioned, I'm glad you said that. Okay, so her question is about who can that mirror be? Well, the mirror is everybody.
Okay.
Okay, absolutely everybody's the mirror. But there are some times, some lessons that you want to learn from an expert teacher, let's say. Right? So let's imagine if you were a martial artist. If you were a martial artist, the likelihood is you wouldn't be trying to, if you were serious about the art, you wouldn't be trying to learn by, just watching a bunch of videos, or just randomly, haphazardly going to this class, maybe that class, maybe that class, maybe this class, and that you do that for a number of years. That wouldn't make you proficient. What will have to happen is you'll have to get under a reputable, trusted instructor that you have a relationship with of sorts, right? And then that person brings you along in your development and all that. And then you're trying to learn something very specific. You're trying to hone it in. And so I would say that the pair bonding of an intimate relationship is like being under a master instructor when you both understand that. And now, will everybody take advantage of that? No, but people who do know how to take advantage of that will definitely be in a better spot. Thank you for asking.
Well, I have two things.
Sure.
First thing is, I think sometimes like where I get off is that you kind of, when you said meditation, sleep, and eating, right? Those are three things that like the society that we live in as college students, like they fight against. I know they say if you're not doing more, then you're not going to be as successful, or if you're not living this busy life, then you probably won't make it to the top, so to speak, or whatever. And so I think that's sometimes where I get confused, because in those times where I do feel like I'm developing and everything, then I start to feel like I'm not doing enough. I'm too slow. I'm procrastinating. I have somewhere I have to be. And so that's kind of where I get messed up. And
I feel you.
then another thing.
Hold on, let me get that one.
Okay.
Unless you go.
No.
Okay. All right. So yeah, the thing about your individual ego is to our detriment. Our culture has kind of embodied an overall ego that kind of matches in that way.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, remember, sometimes you feel better about what you think, by projecting on somebody else and beating them up. And so we have a culture of projecting onto folks that they're not doing enough or whatever, and then making you think you have to be in the melee consistently.
Yeah.
Right. You don't have to.
Or you won't get there.
Yeah. And that ends up being the question. What is there? Right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And so that ends up being the situation. You end up trying to get there by not going. And that won't. Again, that ends up quite often is somebody else's notion of what successful ends up meaning. Not that you don't have to work hard, not that you don't have to be regimented, not all that, but you definitely don't have to worry about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I found myself working the hardest and being more productive and going towards self-development when I'm not doing a lot of that. But then at the same time, you start to look around and it's like, no, maybe I'm coming around. Because everybody else is like on the hustle and bustle.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Remember now, there is success that is measured in external, little checks and boxes and all that kind of stuff. There's that. But the thing about internal and spiritual growth is it's not metered that way. Nor is it, nor can you determine how far you've grown that way. In fact, there's one particular guru who I like a lot, who ends up saying that with a spiritual development, you can only check it once a year. Because you will not have, it's like a person gets on the scale twice a day when they're trying to lose weight. It's not going to, tell them anything, right? It's not going to give them the information they want. It's going to increase that, in them or what have you. So, yeah. What was your second question?
And my second question,
I'll come back. If you think about it, I'll come back. All right. One? Is that a hand?
Yeah, that's a
two.
hand.
1, 2.
I mean, I guess you get to a certain point where you love everyone, love yourself, but what is what is happening when you fall out of love with someone? Are you just deciding not to love them anymore, or what kind of thing is happening?
Well, we're using the same words to talk about a lot of different things.
Okay.
So we said love 3 or 4 times, but we meant 3 or 4 different things in that statement. So So here's part of the deal. If we gotta swing for the fences, then here's the notion. The idea is that part of the development of new culture understanding of love is that we eliminate the illusion of separateness, because that's part of the thing. We are not separate from one another. We are extensions of the same thing. And so part of our difficulty is that. And so the increasing of loving everybody is to understand that you are the same as everybody. Not definitely in an equality sense, but in a much more fundamental, actual sense. That thing we were saying before, it also requires that reverse notion of the body, that I'm not emanating out, that we're all emanating, and then we're particularized perspectives on that emanating, is what we end up being. Right, so what ends up happening if I fall out with somebody, there's something in me that I need to learn. And there's something, this is an opportunity this person has presented me with, to be sure. And to the extent that I'm hurt, that's the same extent to which I will have to go into myself. Especially after, the first reaction is, anger. But you would recognize that anger is not at the other person like you think. And the more that you hold it, that's the more that you're holding the tension. Right? I think I said this the other day to somebody, if you are talking to somebody and they still get rip-roaring mad at their ex, that means they're still in love with their ex solid. In the romantic way that they're telling you they're not. So there's a sense in which the anger, once it goes away, and then you have that hold, then you got to go in there and see what's in there. And then that's the time to do the repairing of you, because there's some expectation, there's something that happened, there's something you ignored, there's something that you allowed continually that then just came back. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Sir, and I'll get one more after this.
So when we experience our favorite self, right, when we're pursuing the truth of ourselves and we get that, is that akin to the opposite of that narrow but intense pain of the paper cut? Is that why it's so easy for us to pursue something other than our favorite self, the truth of ourself? Because it seems like we find ourselves in relationships that aren't in pursuit of that they're more so in pursuit of the projecting, of the trying to control oneself through someone else instead of directing it towards yourself.
Right. I didn't hear the question. I heard you ask me, was that right?
And I'm asking you, is that the case?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Cool. Do we have another question? Yes, ma'am.
Wait,
Oh.
so much.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, he said so much easier to go towards something else. Why is it so much easier again?
Okay, because we sometimes shy away from certain challenges. Now, to be very honest with you, I have not got that one worked out yet. I'm still working that one out. Why is it that we involve ourselves in self-deprecating behavior? The easy answer is that we don't know the truth of ourselves. That's the easy answer. And so when you're confused about the truth of you, then you try to find yourself in places that you are not. Okay, and so then try to make sure you're not there. And then when you get hurt and burned, you're like, okay, fine, that's not me. Right? And so then sometimes people cycle through that as opposed to learning from it, because there's something, until you learn from it, word has it, that you're going to cycle right back through it. You're going to do it again. If you didn't learn it, you get burned the same exact way again. If you didn't learn it, you're going to bring it back to you again. And so there's something in it. There's something in it to be learned, for sure, and then you move up a level, so to speak. And then sometimes you got to go back and learn old lessons again, and then grow up again. But yeah, I mean, that's a good way to put it, to be sure. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious do you feel that, I'm trying not to categorize.
I understand. Just say it how you say it and I'll sort it out.
Okay, I'm just wondering, is this self-realization and pursuit of what you believe could be a monogamy, or do you believe in polyamory versus?
What's that word mean?
The ability to love more than one person at the same time.
Right. Yeah. So it is our culture that gives us this notion that we can't, but we easily can, and it's been demonstrated over and over and over and over and over. Now, the question ends up being, though, that going back to that thing I said a minute ago about how many master instructors can you have at one time. So that's a different kind of question. There are confusions, and there are reasons to have a very specific pairing at certain levels. There are certain reasons for that, but that still does not negate the idea that you can intensely love everybody. It doesn't mean, remember again, when I say love, we're going way past what's called physical, right? Is that it?
Thank
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all very much for coming out. If you are in my class and are looking to get an extra credit situation, what I would ask to happen here is I need one of you, two of you, three of you, to put some pieces of paper down over here, and then which class you're in, and then all y'all sign that same sheet, and then I'll get it, and then I'll be moved. All right, but thank y'all very much for coming out. I'm gonna try to put this video up so y'all can see it online. You do it.
Sword.
Yeah, he's right. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, good. Good. It's a lot better. Taking it out and setting it in a different area where it's dry off the bottom a little bit. It's a lot better. Yeah. I'll be talking to you some more about that. I'll get some more. All right. Thank you very much for coming. All right.
I get it first. I got EG. That's how good.
So you're in yeah.